The hook. A desolate battlefield, and a dying alien girl. The battlefield was silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet that came after destruction. Smoke lingered in the air, and the ground was littered with debris, broken weapons, shattered armor, and lifeless bodies of both human and alien soldiers. The once lush plains of Tarvina had turned into a graveyard, marked by craters and scorched earth. Shea lay among the wreckage, her body broken and her spirit fading. The young alien girl's green skin was streaked with blood, her once bright golden eyes now dull with pain. Her people had left her behind, seeing her injuries as a liability. In her culture, the weak were abandoned. Survival was for the strong. She blinked slowly, her vision blurry. Each breath was a struggle, her chest heaving as she fought against the creeping darkness. She knew she was dying. Her people wouldn't return, and she had no strength left to call for help. The war with humans had taken everything from her, her family, her friends, her future. Just as her eyelids began to close, a sound broke through the stillness. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and coming closer. Axia's heart raced in fear. Humans. She had heard stories of their cruelty, how they showed no mercy to her kind. Panic surged through her, but her body refused to move. Captain Ryan Carter stepped carefully over the rubble, his sharp eyes scanning the area. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in the dusty, worn armor of a human soldier. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, his expression one of grim determination. He had survived the battle, but barely. Now he was searching for anything useful, supplies, intel, or perhaps a sign of other survivors. Ryan's gaze fell on Axia, and he froze. At first, he thought she was dead, just another casualty of war. But then he saw her chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. Her alien features were strange to him, delicate, almost fragile, with markings that shimmered faintly in the dim light. She was clearly injured, with a deep gash on her leg and a nasty burn across her arm. Ryan's instincts screamed at him to leave. Helping an enemy was dangerous, foolish even. She could be a trap, bait left behind to lure unsuspecting humans. But as he stood there, something about her struck him. The fear in her eyes, the way she seemed so small and vulnerable. It reminded him of the refugees he had once saved back on Earth. Axia's golden eyes flickered open, locking onto Ryan's. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. She didn't have the strength to beg for mercy, but her gaze said it all. "Please don't hurt me." Ryan knelt cautiously, keeping his weapon at the ready. "Can you understand me?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Axia didn't respond, but her eyes remained fixed on his face. She wasn't sure what he was saying, but his tone didn't carry the malice she had expected. "Damn it," Ryan muttered under his breath. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small medical kit. As a soldier, he had been trained to treat injuries in the field, but this was the first time he'd ever tried to help an alien. Axia flinched as he moved closer, her body trembling with fear. Ryan paused, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "I just want to help." Her gaze shifted to the medical supplies in his hands. She didn't trust him. How could she? But she had no other choice. With great effort, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Ryan worked quickly, cleaning her wounds and wrapping them in bandages. The burn on her arm was tricky, but he managed to apply a cooling gel that seemed to ease her pain. As he worked, he noticed how frail she seemed, her body trembling with every touch. "You're lucky I found you," he said, more to himself than to her. "You wouldn't have lasted much longer out here." Faye didn't understand his words, but she could sense his frustration mixed with concern. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, faint and fragile like a candle in the wind. Once her injuries were tended to, Ryan stood and looked around. He couldn't stay here. The area was too exposed, and enemy patrols could be nearby. He glanced down at Xia, wondering if she could even walk. "Can you move?" he asked, gesturing for her to stand. Xia tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out, and she collapsed with a soft cry of pain. Ryan sighed and muttered, "Of course not." Without hesitation, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and bent down, carefully lifting her into his arms. Xia stiffened, her heart pounding as she was lifted off the ground. She had never been this close to a human before. His grip was firm but gentle, his warmth seeping through the cold metal of his armor. "We're going to find shelter," Ryan said, more for his own sanity than hers. "I can't just leave you here." As he carried her away from the battlefield, Xia's fear began to fade, replaced by a strange, tentative trust. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone. Unbeknownst to either of them, their fates were now intertwined, setting the stage for a journey neither could have imagined. The battlefield disappeared into the distance, and with it, the war that had brought them together. Suspense hung in the air. What lay ahead for this unlikely pair? Neither knew, but one thing was certain. Their story was just beginning. Uneasy allies. The rescue begins. Ryan trudged through the desolate terrain, his boots crunching on the brittle soil. The weight of the alien girl in his arms wasn't unbearable, but it wasn't light either. Xia's breathing was shallow, her body limp from exhaustion and pain. He didn't know how long she could hold on, and that thought unsettled him. His instincts told him to leave her behind. She wasn't his problem. Yet as he glanced down at her fragile frame, he knew he couldn't abandon her. The human side of him, the side that refused to let innocent lives slip away, overruled his survival training. Ryan's hidden shelter wasn't far, tucked into a rocky outcrop, shielded from enemy patrols and scanning drones. It wasn't much, a small cave reinforced with camo netting and salvage tech, but it had kept him alive for weeks. He just hoped it would do the same for her. Inside the shelter, Ryan laid Xia down on a makeshift cot. Her alien physiology was strange to him, but he had patched up enough soldiers to recognize signs of dehydration and blood loss. He grabbed his canteen and tilted it toward her lips. "Drink," he said firmly. Xia hesitated, her golden eyes wary. The water smelled foreign to her, and her instincts warned her against trusting a human. But the dryness in her throat and the pounding in her head left her no choice. She sipped tentatively, then greedily. Ryan pulled the canteen back. "Easy," he warned. "You'll choke." Xia's gaze softened, though her fear hadn't completely faded. She whispered something in her native tongue, a soft, melodic sound that Ryan couldn't understand. "I don't know what you're saying," he replied, shaking his head. "But you're welcome, I guess." As he tended to her, Ryan couldn't shake the tension in his gut. Keeping her alive was one thing, but keeping both of them alive, that was a different challenge altogether. The enemy wasn't just out there searching for survivors. They'd be hunting anything that looked remotely human or allied with humans. He glanced at his scanner, a crude device that pinged nearby movement. It had been quiet all day, but now a faint blip appeared on the screen. Something, or someone, was heading their way. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Xia noticed the change in his demeanor. Her body tensed as Ryan quickly moved to the entrance of the shelter, peering out into the distance. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the jagged terrain. Ryan grabbed his rifle and turned back to her. "Stay quiet," he instructed, pointing to his lips as if to emphasize the importance of silence. Xia nodded weakly, understanding the gesture even if she didn't fully grasp his words. The tension in the air was palpable. Ryan crouched low, his eyes scanning the horizon. His training kicked in, his breathing slowed, his grip on the rifle steady. The faint blip on the scanner grew stronger, closer. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. A patrol of alien soldiers emerged from the shadows, their sleek armor glinting in the dim light. They moved in formation, scanning the area with energy rifles at the ready. Ryan's mind raced. The shelter was well hidden, But it wasn't invincible. If they found it, there was no way he could fight them all off. He turned back to Xia, who was watching him with wide, terrified eyes. "They're looking for us," he whispered. "If they find us, we're dead." Her breathing quickened, panic threatening to overwhelm her. Ryan placed a steady hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and firm. "You need to trust me. Can you do that?" Xia hesitated, then gave a small nod. Ryan motioned for her to stay hidden as he crept toward the entrance, his rifle trained on the approaching soldiers. The aliens were getting closer, their voices carrying through the stillness of the night. Ryan held his breath as one of them stopped, scanning the area with a device that emitted a soft, rhythmic beep. They were getting too close. His finger hovered over the trigger, ready to fight if it came to that. Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the ground. The soldiers froze, their attention snapping to the direction of the noise. It was far off, likely another skirmish between factions, but it was enough to draw them away. One by one, they turned and headed toward the sound, their voices fading into the distance. Ryan exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He waited until the scanner showed no signs of movement before returning to Xia. "They're gone," he said, though he wasn't sure she understood. Xia's body relaxed, but her expression remained troubled. She murmured something again, her voice filled with uncertainty. Ryan sat down across from her, exhaustion catching up to him. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he admitted, half to her, half to himself. "You're just as much an enemy as they are. But you're different." Xia tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand his words. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "We're stuck with each other for now, so let's figure out how to survive this mess." Xia watched him intently, her fear slowly giving way to something else. She didn't fully trust him yet, but in that moment, she realized he wasn't like the others. He wasn't a monster. The uneasy alliance between them had begun. Outside, the battlefield continued to rage, but inside the small shelter, a fragile bond was forming, one that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. Escaping the enemy, bond of survival. The silence inside the shelter was uneasy, like the calm before a storm. Xia lay on the makeshift cot, her body weak, but her senses alert. Ryan sat nearby, cleaning his rifle and muttering to himself. He couldn't help but glance at the scanner every few minutes, worried the patrol would double back. Xia watched him, her golden eyes studying his every move. She didn't understand the human language, but she could read the tension in his body, the way his shoulders were stiff, the way his eyes flickered toward the entrance. He was as trapped as she was. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "We can't stay here," he said, more to himself than to her. "They'll sweep through again, and this place isn't safe anymore." Xia tilted her head, not comprehending his words but sensing his urgency. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her leg made her wince. Ryan noticed and quickly moved to her side. "Hey, take it easy," he said, gently pressing her back down. He grabbed his med kit and checked her bandages. "You're still in rough shape, but if we're going to get out of here, you'll have to move." Xia looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. She didn't trust him completely, but his actions so far had shown her he wasn't like the others. Slowly, she nodded. Ryan gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Good. Let's get you ready." He pulled out a lightweight exosuit from his pack, a piece of salvage tech designed to assist injured soldiers. It wasn't perfect, but it would help Xia move without putting too much strain on her injuries. "This might feel weird," he warned as he slipped the suit onto her. Xia flinched at the cold metal against her skin, but allowed him to continue. When he activated it, the suit hummed softly, supporting her movements. She stood slowly, testing her weight on her injured leg. "See, not so bad," Ryan said, giving her a thumbs up. Xia mimicked the gesture awkwardly, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. Their moment of calm didn't last. The scanner beeped loud and insistent. Ryan's heart sank as he saw multiple blips moving toward their location. "They're back," he muttered, grabbing his rifle and a small bag of supplies. He looked at Xia, his tone urgent. "We need to go. Now." Xia didn't need to understand his words to feel the panic in his voice. She nodded and followed him as he led her out of the shelter. The landscape outside was a maze of jagged rocks and scorched earth. Ryan moved quickly but carefully, keeping low to avoid detection. Xia followed as best she could, the exosuit helping her keep pace despite her injuries. As they moved, Ryan couldn't help but notice how quiet she was. Most people, or aliens, would have been panicking, but Xia seemed focused, her golden eyes scanning the terrain for threats. They reached a narrow ravine, and Ryan paused to check the scanner. The blips were closer now, too close for comfort. He cursed under his breath. "We're not going to outrun them," he said. He turned to Xia, gesturing for her to stay low. "We'll have to outsmart them." Xia watched as he rummaged through his bag, pulling out a handful of small devices. He placed them strategically along the path, explaining as he worked even though he knew she wouldn't understand. "These are decoys," he said. "They'll make noise and light up like a beacon. It should draw them away from us." Xia crouched beside him, watching intently. She didn't understand the human's technology, but she could tell he was trying to protect her. Once the traps were set, Ryan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a small cave hidden in the rocks. They crouched inside, their breathing shallow as they waited. The sound of footsteps echoed through the ravine. Xia's heart pounded as she gripped Ryan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Ryan gave her a reassuring nod, silently signaling her to stay calm. The decoys activated, emitting loud, erratic noises that echoed through the canyon. The alien patrol shouted in their guttural language, their voices filled with confusion as they moved toward the traps. Ryan peeked out from the cave, watching as the patrol split up to investigate the decoys. He turned to Xia and gestured for her to follow. "Come on," he whispered. They slipped out of the cave and moved in the opposite direction, careful to avoid the patrol's line of sight. Ryan's heart raced as they climbed over rocks and darted through shadows, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, they'd reached a small ridge overlooking the stretch of open terrain. In the distance, Ryan could see a cluster of abandoned vehicles, likely from the earlier battle. If they could reach them, they might find something to aid their escape. "We're almost there," Ryan said, pointing toward the vehicles. Xia followed his gaze, her expression determined. She wasn't sure what he was planning, but she trusted him, for now. As they started down the ridge, the sound of an energy blast shattered the silence. A patrol had spotted them. "Run," Ryan shouted, grabbing Xia's hand as they sprinted toward the vehicles. The exosuit hummed with every step, helping Xia keep pace despite her injuries. Blaster fire erupted behind them, scorching the ground and kicking up dirt. Ryan fired back, his shots precise and calculated. Xia flinched at the noise but kept running, her survival instincts taking over. They'd reached the vehicles just as the patrol closed in. Ryan dove behind a burnt-out transport, pulling Xia with him. "We'll make our stand here," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Xia nodded, her fear giving way to a fierce resolve. For the first time, she wasn't just running to survive, she was fighting to live. Together, they prepared to face the enemy, their uneasy alliance transforming into something stronger. In this moment, they weren't just human and alien. They were survivors, bound by the will to endure. Shared secrets, humanity shines through. The night crept in, blanketing the landscape in a cold, eerie silence. The burnt-out vehicle offered little protection, but for now, it was enough. Ryan and Xia sat in the shadow of the wreck, their backs against its scorched hull. Both were breathing heavily, their bodies worn from the escape. Ryan's eyes scanned the horizon, his rifle resting on his lap. He hadn't spotted any movement for the last hour, but he wasn't ready to relax yet. Survival out here meant staying alert. Always. Xia, however, was struggling to stay awake. Her body was exhausted, her injuries weighing her down. Yet she couldn't take her eyes off Ryan. There was something about the human soldier that fascinated her. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. Alien, yes, but not cruel like her people had warned. Ryan noticed her staring and raised an eyebrow. What? Something on my face. Xia tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't understand his words, but his tone was light, teasing. Tentatively, she pointed to his chest, where a jagged scar peeked out from under his armor. Ryan glanced down and smirked. This? Yeah, got that a few years back. Not my finest moment. He tapped the scar with his fingers, then gestured to her arm, where a fresh bandage covered her burn. Looks like we both have a few stories, huh? Xia hesitated, then lifted her hand to trace the faint markings on her skin. Each mark told a story. Her family, her training, her role in her society. They shimmered faintly in the moonlight, a reminder of the life she had lost. Ryan watched her, his curiosity piqued. Those markings, they mean something, don't they? He asked, knowing she wouldn't understand but speaking anyway. Xia nodded, her fingers brushing over the symbols with reverence. She murmured a word softly, her voice barely audible. Family. Ryan's eyes widened. It was the first word he had understood from her. Family. He repeated, pointing to her markings. Xia nodded again, her expression solemn. She pointed to the sky, then to her heart, trying to convey her loss. Ryan's chest tightened. He didn't need words to understand what she was saying. He had seen that same grief in the eyes of countless soldiers, refugees, and survivors. I know what that feels like, he said quietly, leaning back against the vehicle. Losing people, feeling like you're the only one left. He tapped the side of his helmet, activating a small holographic projector. A faint image flickered to life, a photo of a smiling woman holding a little girl. Xia's eyes widened as she studied the image. The woman and child looked happy, their faces warm and bright. She pointed to the child, then to Ryan, tilting her head in question. That's my daughter, Ryan said, his voice soft. Her name's Lily. She's back on Earth. Xia's gaze shifted to him, her expression unreadable. She could hear the sadness in his tone, even if she didn't understand his words. I joined this war to protect her, Ryan continued, his fingers brushing over the hologram, to make sure she has a future. But now, he trailed off, shaking his head. I don't even know if I'll make it back. Xia reached out, her slender hand hovering over the hologram before she gently tapped it. She didn't know how to comfort him, but she wanted to try. Ryan looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, he said. I guess we're both carrying a lot, huh? The moment was interrupted by a faint beeping from Ryan's scanner. He quickly deactivated the hologram and checked the device. The blips were faint, but they were moving, slowly and deliberately. They're still out there, he muttered. Xia leaned over, her golden eyes narrowing as she studied the scanner. She pointed to a nearby cluster of rocks on the map, then to herself, miming a signal. You want to distract them? Ryan asked, shaking his head. No way. You're still hurt. Xia frowned, her expression determined. She pointed to Ryan, then to the scanner, miming an escape route. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You're stubborn, you know that. Xia didn't need to understand his words to know he was reluctant. She placed a hand on his arm, her gaze steady. Finally, Ryan relented. All right, but we do this my way. He rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small beacon. He handed it to Xia, pointing to the cluster of rocks. Plant this there. It'll draw them away long enough for us to move. Xia nodded, clutching the beacon tightly. As she moved into the shadows, Ryan felt a pang of guilt. He knew she was putting herself at risk, but he also knew she was capable. For the first time, He realized how much he had come to trust her. From the safety of his cover, Ryan watched as Thea crept toward the rocks. Her movements were silent, her lithe frame blending into the shadows. She placed the beacon carefully, then activated it. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, and within moments, the blips on the scanner shifted toward it. Ryan smirked. "That'll do." She returned to him, her face flushed with exertion but triumphant. "Nice work," Ryan said, giving her a thumbs up. As they moved toward their next destination, a strange feeling settled between them. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was something deeper, a shared understanding, a fragile bond that was growing stronger with every step. For the first time in a long while, neither felt completely alone. A fierce battle, choosing sides. The dawn cast a pale glow over the jagged landscape, but it brought no comfort. Ryan and Kaya had traveled through the night, slipping past patrols and navigating treacherous terrain. They now crouched near the edge of a ruined outpost, its collapsed structures providing a temporary haven. Ryan scanned the horizon with his binoculars, noting the patterns of enemy patrols. "We've got to keep moving," he said, more to himself than to Exia. "If they catch us out here, it's over." Exia, leaning against a piece of shattered wall, tilted her head at him, her golden eyes questioning. She still didn't fully understand his words, but she could sense his tension. As Ryan packed his gear, the faint hum of an engine reached their ears. His body tensed. He grabbed Exia's arm and pulled her down behind the wall. A sleek alien hovercraft came into view, gliding across the broken landscape. It stopped just meters away, and a group of armed soldiers disembarked. Ryan's stomach tightened as he recognized the lead figure, Sergeant Elias Ward, an old comrade turned mercenary. "Damn it," Ryan muttered. Ward's voice rang out, amplified by a speaker on his helmet. "Carter, I know you're out there. You've always been a stubborn bastard, but I'm giving you one chance to make this easy. Hand over the alien, and I'll let you walk away." Ryan's jaw tightened. He glanced at Tia, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Danger. Ward continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come on, Ryan. You know how this works. She's just another asset. The bounty on her is enough to buy a new life. Don't throw yours away for some alien." Ryan's grip on his rifle tightened. He leaned closer to Kxia, his voice low and steady. "Stay here. No matter what happens, don't move." Kxia grabbed his arm, her expression pleading. She shook her head, her fear evident. Ryan gave her a faint smile. "It's going to be okay. Trust me." He stepped out from behind the wall, his rifle trained on Ward. "Elias," Ryan called out, his voice cold. "Still stabbing people in the back, huh?" Ward laughed, his soldiers raising their weapons, always the moralist, Carter. "But this isn't about right or wrong. It's about survival. And right now, you're outnumbered." Ryan smirked. "You've always underestimated me." The first shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. Ryan ducked behind cover as Ward's men opened fire. Blasts of energy seared through the air, scorching the ground around him. Ryan returned fire with precision, taking down 2 of Ward's soldiers. But they were too many, and their firepower was overwhelming. Hea watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding. She could see Ryan was outmatched, yet he fought with unyielding determination. Something inside her stirred, a fierce need to protect the man who had risked everything for her. She glanced at a discarded weapon nearby, one of the alien blasters left behind during the initial skirmish. It was a design she recognized, a weapon she had trained with in her earlier days. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. Ryan was pinned down, his ammo running low. Ward stepped closer, his weapon trained on Ryan. "You've got guts, Carter," Ward said, grinning. "But guts won't save you." Before Ward could pull the trigger, a sudden, piercing blast cut through the air. His soldiers turned in confusion as one of their own fell to the ground, a smoking hole in his armor. Ryan's head snapped around, his eyes widening as he saw Xia standing tall, the alien blaster in her hands. Her golden eyes burned with determination. Ward snarled. So the aliens got fight in her, huh? Makes this more interesting. Xia fired again, her shots precise and calculated. She moved with a grace and confidence that surprised even Ryan. Together, they began to turn the tide. Ryan used the distraction to his advantage, taking out the remaining soldiers one by one. Ward, realizing he was losing, retreated toward the hovercraft. "You've made a mistake, Carter," he shouted as he climbed aboard. "You think this is over. The bounty on her head will bring every hunter in the sector after you." The hovercraft sped away, leaving Ryan and Kaida standing amidst the chaos. Ryan lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. He turned to Xia, who was still holding the blaster tightly. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Xia nodded, her hands shaking as she lowered the weapon. Ryan stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved my life," he said, his tone filled with genuine gratitude. Xia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Slowly, she reached up and placed a hand over his, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. As the sun climbed higher, the battlefield fell silent once more. Ryan knew Ward's words weren't just bluster. Their fight had painted a target on their backs. But as he looked at Xia, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting. For each other, and for a future neither had dared to dream of before. The final escape, sacrifices, and promises. The horizon burned orange as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the barren terrain. Ryan and Xia moved carefully, sticking to the cover of jagged rocks and the remnants of long-abandoned outposts. The encounter with Ward had left them rattled but resolute. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. Ryan's scanner pinged faintly, its screen flickering with signs of movement. "They're sweeping the area again," he muttered, glancing at Xia. "We need to get to the extraction point before they box us in." Xia tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing as she studied the flickering blips on the screen. Though she didn't fully understand the technology, she could sense the urgency in Ryan's voice. Ahead, the terrain opened into a vast expanse of cracked earth, broken only by the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving city. The extraction point, a beacon left behind by human forces, lay somewhere in the heart of the ruins. It was their only hope of escape, but the open ground was a death trap. Ryan crouched low, scanning the area with his binoculars. "We'll have to move fast," he said. "There's no cover out there, and if they spot us..." A sudden explosion rocked the ground behind them, cutting him off. Both Ryan and Xia ducked instinctively, their ears ringing from the blast. Dust and debris rained down as a patrol of alien soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the pair. "Go!" Ryan shouted, grabbing Xia's arm and pulling her into a sprint. Blaster fire erupted around them, searing through the air and kicking up clouds of dust. Ryan zigzagged, keeping himself between Xia and the enemy. His rifle barked in return, each shot precise, but the sheer number of soldiers made it impossible to hold them off. Xia stumbled, her injured leg buckling under the strain. Ryan caught her before she hit the ground, hoisting her up with a grunt. "Not giving up now," he growled, his determination unshakable. They'd reached the edge of the ruins, ducking behind a crumbling wall. Ryan glanced back, his heart sinking as he saw the enemy closing in. His ammo was nearly gone, and Xia was struggling to keep up. "This isn't going to work," he muttered, his mind racing. Xia tugged at his arm, drawing his attention. She pointed to a nearby building, its upper level still intact. She made a gesture, a sweeping motion, as if to say go. Ryan frowned, shaking his head. "No, I'm not leaving you." Xia's eyes flashed with determination. She placed a hand on his chest, then pointed to the beacon on his scanner. Her meaning was clear. "You have to make it. For both of us." No way, Ryan said firmly. We've come too far together. I'm not abandoning you now. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the air, growing louder with every second. Hexia's expression softened, and she reached up, placing a hand on Ryan's face. She murmured something in her native tongue, her voice calm and steady. Ryan didn't understand her words, but the meaning behind them was unmistakable. Trust me. Reluctantly, Ryan nodded. He handed her his backup pistol, a compact but powerful weapon. I'll come back for you, he promised. Just hold them off long enough for me to get the signal out. Xia nodded, her grip on the pistol firm. Ryan hesitated for a moment, his eyes locking with hers. Then he turned and sprinted toward the beacon's location, weaving through the ruins as the sound of blaster fire erupted behind him. Xia stepped out from behind the wall, firing the pistol with precision. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Each shot was a reminder of her purpose, a desperate stand to protect the man who had given her hope when she had none. Ryan reached the beacon, a small but powerful transmitter embedded in the wreckage of a collapsed tower. He activated it, the device emitting a pulsing light as it sent out a signal to any nearby human forces. Come on, he muttered, glancing back toward the battle. Through the ruins, he could see Xia holding her ground, her movements swift and calculated. But the enemy was closing in, their numbers overwhelming. Just as Ryan thought all was lost, a low rumble shook the ground. He looked up to see a human dropship descending from the clouds, its engines roaring as it approached the beacon. We've got your signal, Captain. A voice crackled through his comm. Hang tight. We're coming in hot. Ryan's relief was short-lived. He saw Xia stumble, her pistol knocked from her hands as an alien soldier lunged at her. Without thinking, Ryan grabbed his rifle and fired, the shot taking down her attacker. Xia, he shouted, running toward her. The dropship's guns roared, laying down suppressing fire as Ryan reached Xia's side. She was on her knees, her breathing labored but her eyes still burning with determination. Let's get out of here, Ryan said, lifting her into his arms. The dropship landed, its ramp lowering as human soldiers poured out, covering their retreat. Ryan carried Xia aboard, his heart pounding as the ship lifted off, leaving the battlefield behind. Inside the dropship, Ryan set Xia down gently, his hands trembling. Her injuries were severe, but she was alive. You did it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We made it. Xia reached out, her hand brushing against his. She didn't need words to convey her gratitude or her trust. As the dropship soared into the sky, Ryan looked down at her, a fierce resolve building in his chest. He had made her a promise, and he intended to keep it. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. A new beginning, love and unity. The dropship hummed softly as it broke through the atmosphere, carrying Ryan and Xia to safety. The tension in the cabin began to fade, replaced by a heavy, exhausted silence. Ryan sat on the cold metal floor, cradling Xia in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, her injuries taking their toll. We're almost there, he murmured, brushing a stray lock of her silvery hair from her face. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he needed to say it. For her and for himself. The dropship's pilot called out over the comm. We'll be landing at base in 5 minutes. Medical teams are on standby. Ryan nodded, though his eyes never left Xia's face. She had fought so hard, sacrificing her safety to give them both a chance. He wasn't going to let her down now. The ship landed with a jolt, and medics rushed aboard. Ryan reluctantly handed Xia over, his heart clenching as they whisked her away. He followed close behind, his rifle still slung over his shoulder like a shield. The base was bustling with activity, a stark contrast to the desolation they had left behind. Humans and alien allies moved through the corridors, their strained expressions softening as they caught sight of Ryan. He was a survivor, a symbol of resilience. But Ryan didn't care about the stares or the murmurs. His focus was on Xia, now lying in a sterile medbay. The human medics worked swiftly, their advanced equipment stabilizing her vitals. "She's strong," one of them said, glancing at Ryan. "She'll pull through." Relief washed over him, but it was fleeting. He stayed by her side, refusing to leave even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Hours passed before Sia stirred, her golden eyes fluttering open. She looked around, disoriented, before her gaze landed on Ryan. "Hey," he said softly, a smile breaking through his tired features. "You're safe now." Xia's lips moved, forming a word she had struggled to learn during their journey. "Safe." Ryan chuckled, a sound of pure relief. "Yeah, safe." Over the next few weeks, Xia's recovery was swift. Her resilience surprised even the medics, who marveled at her ability to heal despite the odds. During this time, Ryan never left her side, teaching her human words and gestures, helping her navigate this strange new world. Xia, in turn, began to teach Ryan about her culture. She explained the significance of her markings, the songs of her people, and the traditions she had thought were lost. Though their languages were different, they found ways to understand each other, their bond growing stronger with every passing day. But not everyone in the base welcomed Xia. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and suspicious glances shadowed her every step. To many, she was still the enemy. Ryan stood up for her, his voice firm and unwavering. "She's not just an alien," he told anyone who questioned her presence. "She's a survivor. She's one of us now." One day, as they walked through the base's quiet gardens, Ryan turned to Xia, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he began, "when I found you out there, I wasn't just saving you. You saved me too." Xia tilted her head, her golden eyes searching his. She reached out, placing a hand over his heart. "Family," she said softly, one of the first words he had taught her. Ryan's chest tightened. He hadn't felt this kind of connection since losing his squad, since leaving Earth and the family he hoped to return to. Xia wasn't just a companion. She had become his anchor, his reason to keep fighting. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "In my culture, when two people care about each other, they make it official. They become family." Xia's eyes widened, her markings glowing faintly in the dim light. She didn't need him to explain further. She understood. "Yes," she said, her voice firm despite her accent. Ryan laughed softly. "You're sure?" Xia nodded, her golden eyes alight with emotion. "Family," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. The ceremony was small, attended only by a handful of allies who had grown to trust Xia. It was a mix of human and alien traditions. Xia sang a hauntingly beautiful song in her native tongue, while Ryan recited vows in simple, heartfelt words. As they stood together, hands clasped, Ryan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The war wasn't over, and the challenges ahead would be immense. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Their union wasn't just a promise to each other, it was a symbol of hope. A human soldier and an alien survivor, defying the odds and bridging the divide between their worlds. As the sun set over the base, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Ryan and Xia stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, together.